Chapter 5, Policing Post 9/11 Society. Learning objectives. Describe the 5 broad strategic organizational approaches currently operating in contemporary policing. Identify the 2 critical key elements at the heart of the community policing. Explain how private security officers differ from public police officers. Summarize in order of application the 4 strategies used in the SARA model problem solving. List the 4 principles of CompStat. Compare and contrast tactical and strategic intelligence and illustrate how they are derived through intelligence cycle. Illustrate the predictive policing process, including brief explanations of what occurs during each step. So when we look at policing, a new type of policing, data-driven, intelligence-led policing emerged as a direct result of 9/11 terrorists. So when we think of the 9/11 terrorists, one of the things that happened to us was we had gotten kind of relaxed as a United States, as a nation, not only intelligence, but also in law enforcement. So some of these things, had we had intelligence-led policing and intelligence-led on a federal level and state and local levels, we may have been able to prevent some of these things, such as 9/11. The framework of policing has expanded from a domestic focus to an international one. Just with 9/11, the people who bombed us, the World Trade Center, and the U.S. attacked us, they were not Americans. This was international crime that came home to us. So now we had to look at policing from a standpoint of you can't just be concerned about what's going on in your community. You got to be concerned about what's going on internationally. And that meant you have to have federal, state, and local law enforcement working together and sharing intelligence. The events of 9/11 impacted organizational development of state and local enforcement agencies, resulting in a renewed focus on community policing, PSM, and on the other data-driven models. So, as I said, it affected federal, state, and local. When you look at community policing, this is working in the communities with individuals to see what's going on. Community policing is that's basically rooted at the grassroots area, trying to figure out from there what's going on versus being outside of the community and trying to come in and solve stuff. Be in the community, know what's going on in the community. Problem solving policing. And this is when you get into not just looking at crime, what's going on in areas, looking at, well, what's the problem? What's the root cause of that? And getting it identified. CompStat policing is where we have a system that was established from New York NYPD, where they started holding the levels of leadership accountable for policing in their areas of responsibility. And you would have weekly or monthly check-ins to hold accountable management, to subsequently hold management accountable, and they subsequently hold their police officers accountable. Intelligence-led policing is where you are gathering information to give you an idea of where things may be transpiring. Evidence-based policing is when you have evidence that shows you what is happening and where it's coming from and who may be doing it. Partnerships and problem solving. So one of the things we found out in contemporary policing is having partnerships is very crucial to in the communities and working with other people. And I'll give you an example. When you say partnerships, you're not just talking about partnerships with law enforcement. You're talking about partnerships with community, HOAs, university police, citizens patrol, all these different things where you have partnerships. You have SARA. So I'll be referring to from this point on as SARA, but SARA is a scanning, analysis, and response and assessment. And when we think about that, the scanning is when you're actually going out looking for, let's see what we find, what's going on. That's your scanning. Your analysis is when you bring it down, you sit down and you start looking at it, conducting your analysis to see, so what does this information tell us? And you conduct an analysis. Once you get the analysis done, now you kind of develop your response. Now we know what to do and where to do it and how to do it. That's your response. And afterwards, you will have your assessment. Was our response successful? And that's usually measurable in way of stats, crime stats. For instance, if the burglaries you determined through your scanning analysis and that it was high crime being triggered by burglaries and robberies. Well, now you know that, then you know the area where it's happening, then you identify who's doing it, and then you go out to assess that, address that, and bring that threat down. Then afterwards, you look to see your assessment, does the burglaries and robberies go down? And they'll stats, they'll show you. Organizational transformation is when you have, you're trying to take your organization from one culture or one school of thought or one management style to another. Very difficult, but a lot of times very necessary. Implicit bias. You have unintentional subconscious associations about people, and that makes it hard. It's hard to give you an example for a police officer. It's hard to go into an area, police area, where you have implicit bias and you believe that these people are inferior and you believe that they're almost animals. If you believe that, then that's what you'll show. And even though you don't think that outright, you do think it subconsciously. So it will affect how you deal with people. The importance of community. So when you look at the social capital, this is where you have the social capital is something of value. It's your relationships within the community. And a lot of times when you think of social capital, we break it down to that would be starting with immediate family, social capital. Then the things that the family members are associated with, organizations, groups, movements. So having connections and working relationships with people with the social capital, that's what social capital is. Capital, social capital. It is of value to law enforcement. Asset mapping is when you look at where you have things, where you within the community. Where do you have assets that you may be able to utilize? For instance, do you have a citizens on patrol in a certain area that you may be able to utilize to help you? I shouldn't say utilize, partner with, to help reduce crime in that area. The broken windows. This is very important because if you go into communities where we have broken windows and graffiti and trash all around, it is a haven for crime. It almost appears nobody cares and nobody gives a darn about the community. So it's a great place for crime. It's been statistically proven if you go in that area and fix the windows, take all the graffiti off the walls and remove the trash, crime will go down. People will feel better about their community. As a matter of fact, they'll be more inclined to start working with the law enforcement when they see that, they taking pride in their community. If you show me a people group, an area where people don't have pride in the community, and I can show you a place where crime can actually go and grow. Serving and protecting diverse populations. We're nowadays in the United States of America, we are so diverse. Your law enforcement officers have to be prepared to deal with all types of people from all types of cultures and all types of backgrounds. And in doing that, that means more so than ever partnering with folks in the community, particularly if it's a community where you have a lot of people who English is not their first language, or you have a community that's full of a lot of immigrants. You have to have ways to connect with them and work with them just as you do everybody else. Involving and educating citizens. Getting citizens involved with what's going on with your endeavors and what you're trying to do, and educating them about what's going on. One of the things, if you have, let them know there's a method to the madness. If you're doing something and they're not involved, and they don't understand it, they may be inclined to resist or push back or not help you or work against you because they don't know what you're doing is in their best interest. The partnerships we talked about before, again, with partnering with anybody and everybody in the community. Stay connected to the community. And that's the most important thing. And you think in partnership, it's not just partnerships with law enforcement agencies, federal, state, and local. It's the stuff within the community. Management style and organization. Once upon a time, law enforcement used to have the autocratic style of doing things. And it's almost militaristic like. That doesn't work today. How do you go about, what management style do you have? And it comes from the chief and executive all the way down to executive staff, all the way down to the lowest ranking officer. So one of the things that found that works really well is a democratic style where people are allowed to participate and get involved and feel like they're working with you versus you there to oppress them. Organizational implements is when you have organizational change and things you're trying to do within them, but you have infighting within the organization. Maybe various levels of management. It may be some of your officers or whatever else. But the bottom line is, whatever it is that the executive team, the chief is trying to do, you may have some folks who are pushing back against it. You may have union impediments. Police, law enforcement agencies have unions. So you may have situations where what the police department is trying to do that the unions may not be on board with. So you have to find ways to find common ground with them, because the unions are the ones that represent police officers, particularly in disciplinary actions and when things go wrong or in prosecutions. Community implements. You may have things within the community where you have people in the community who don't understand what you're doing and they're pushing back. And it may slow progress. May not necessarily be resisting you, but they're not helping you, and they may be slowing the process. And a lot of times it's due because they may not fully understand what you're trying to do. Transition implements is when you're trying to take your police department from maybe one philosophy, leadership style, or in one way of policing to another. And you may have impediments in the way. For instance, officers may believe that what we're trying to do is we're letting the community dictate to us how we police. And that's not a good thing. They may think you're being soft on crime. In essence, you're not. You're actually policing crime a different way. Integrated patrol, community policing, and aggressive enforcement. So when you have the integrated patrol, you have a community policing, aggressive patrol. You have your foot people, your beat officers working on feet, working in conjunction with your patrol officers. And this is a correlation of the two. And you determine what's most likely needed of that, which one is needed based on where they're policing. And evaluation is you do the SARA, what we discussed earlier. And at the end of the day, is this last A is assessment. Is what you doing, is it working? Problem solving, problem solving policing. So when we look at problem solving policing, I'm going to read through this. I'm going to explain a few things to you. A problem rather than a crime. Case, all, or incident is the basic unit of the police work. A problem is something that concerns or causes harm to citizens, not just the police. Things that concern only police officers are important, but they are not problems in the sense of the term. Addressing problems means more than quick fixes. It means dealing with conditions that create the problem. So when we talk about problem solving, a lot of times people will think that's in terms of making arrest. Where we're making a lot of arrests. But let me ask you, I want to ask you a question. Think about this for a minute. You're making a lot of arrests, but ask yourself, why am I making all these arrests? And then ask yourself, then what's causing all of this? If you ask that question, now you're seeking the problem. If you take care of the problem, you can stop all those other crimes. So that's problem solving policing. And that's what you find a lot of times it happens when people come together and working together, law enforcement agencies, and they're looking to reduce violent crime or whatever else. And I like to refer to it as they're looking to eliminate sources. What is the source of the crime in this neighborhood? You may find that it's a lot of crime happening, but it's a few people who are the problem who actually cause it all to happen, or a few groups or gangs that may be involved. And then you have to remove them from the community. Police officers must routinely and systematically analyze problems before trying to solve them, just as they routinely and systematically investigate crimes before making arrests. Individual officers in the department as a whole must develop routines and systems for analyzing problems. The analysis of problems must be thorough, although it may not be complicated. The principle is as true for problem analysis as is for criminal investigation. So, again, it's not going out there and actively policing without doing your homework. And that's what we're talking about here. Before you go out there to say, I'm going to do and we're going to police and we're going to go and we're going to make things better and we're going to reduce violent crime, whatever else, you have to do the homework to determine the who, what, when, where, and why in order to be able to do it successfully. I mean, give you an example. You could theoretically have police officers locking up a lot of people in the area to reduce the violent crime, but they locked up all the people who were actually small fish and was doing just committing crime. They didn't lock up anybody who was actually directing them or instructing them to do the crime. Problems must be addressed precisely and accurately and broken down into specific aspects. Problems often are not what they appear to be. Problems must be understood in terms of the various interests at stake. Individuals and groups of people are affected in different ways by a problem and have different ideas about what should be done about the problem. So when you look at breaking them down, I'll give you an example. You say, well, we want to reduce violent crime in this area. Okay, that's great. But what type of violent crime are you talking about? Are you talking about rapes, robberies, arson, carjacking? That's when you have to break it down and say, okay, let's break this down. Violent crime, there's a lot of different areas of that. So we must break that down and look at that. And you have to understand too how the problems affect different people and how people view them differently within the communities. And one of the ways you learn that is by talking to people in the community, and they can tell you. For instance, let's say that you have an area where you have a bunch of complaints about loud cars going down the street and racing. In some areas, it may not be a problem, but in one particular area, it may be, because this particular area has a lot of children in the neighborhood. You can't have people racing cars in the streets when you have a community full of children. So that is something that is a problem for that community. It may not be in another community. The way the problem is currently being handled must be understood, and the limits of the effectiveness must be openly acknowledged in order to come up with better response. Initially, any and all possible responses to a problem should be considered so not to cut short potentially effective responses. Suggested responses should follow from what is learned during analysis. They should not be limited to nor rule out the use of arrest. So when you're looking at the problems, you have to be fair in assessment about what you're doing. Is it currently working? If it's not, now there's an assessment where you have to sit down and determine what part of what you're doing is successful and what part is not. And you must be willing to adjust course, adapt, and overcome. One of the problems you run into sometimes with this is sometimes people's egos can get in the way. For instance, if I propose a way to reduce some violent crime in a certain neighborhood, and we try my way and we find out that it's only about 50% successful, I may not be willing to try to change from that because I feel like it's my baby and my idea. And that's not about solving a crime. I've made it about me, and it gets personal. So those things can happen. Suggested follow-up. And you always want people to be able to say, you know what, we can adapt this. What did we learn? Well, what should we do differently? And ultimately, at the conclusion of that, the use of arrest. Don't rule them out, because once you identify the problem, one of the ways you resolve the problem is to remove it from the community, and that's through arrest. Police must proactively try to solve problems rather than just react to harmful consequences of problems. The police department must increase police officers' freedom to make or participate in important decisions. At the same time, officers must be accountable for their decision making. The effectiveness of new responses must be evaluated so these results can be shared with other police officers, and the department can systematically learn what does and what doesn't work. So you do want people out there, police officers. You don't want police officers on the street scared to make a decision. They need to be able to make decisions. They have to be able to think on their feet. The department has to give them some autonomy so that they can make those type of decisions. So for a decision in one district, in one area, on one side of town can be a great decision, and that same decision on the other side of town can be a horrible decision. But it's situational decision making by the police officers. And they have to be prepared to do that at all times, and also be prepared to accept the consequences if they make bad decisions. The results must be evaluated. So you must evaluate those results to see what's working and what's not working. And a lot of times, if you have police officers who are out there on the streets, they live it, they see it, and they are actually doing it. So they can come back and tell management what is working, what's not. Management has to be willing to listen to them. Scanning, analyzing, responding, and assessing. So scanning, you're identifying, prioritizing the problems. What is your most pressing problem? For instance, what's the most pressing problem? Simple. A group of people out here robbing and shooting people, or a group of people out here doing purse snatching. Obviously, it's going to be the group of people who's robbing and shooting people versus the purse snatching. You have to prioritize that. Because they are potentially ones who are doing violent crime, and that can cause injury or death to individuals. Analyze and research the info collected. So once you get this info, you analyze the information and you bring it all together. And a lot of times, this is where you have like intelligence analysts who will work on that for the law enforcement officers. Now they start doing the responding. Once they do the responding, they come back and then they assess the evaluations. So a couple of things you want to look at. You want to look at the process evaluation. Was the process that we followed, was it the best process? Could we have done some things different? And now you want to look at the impact. What type of impact did it have on the community? Was it what you thought? Is it the impact you thought you were going to have? Or is it less? CompStat policing, a method of management accountability and a philosophy of crime control. 4 principles. Accurate and timely intelligence, effective tactics, rapid deployment, relentless follow-up and assessment. So these are those meetings that was, I told you, referred to earlier, that was founded by the NYPD, where they actually hold management accountable for the things that they do, that they manage, their areas of responsibility. So they come in, I'll give you an example. You have a captain of a district who'll come in and he or she will talk about the type of crime that's being reported in their community. And they'll give the stats on that. So the next time they come back, and when they give the stats, then the chief and the management team will tell them, well, your robberies are too high. You need to try to do something about your robberies. So when she leaves, she goes back to her district. She's trying to implement a strategy to reduce the robberies. So when she comes back the following month, they want to see the crime stat. They want to see the comp stat. Okay, last month your burglary is at 10%. This month we see they're at 4%. She reduced them. That's what CompStat is designed to do, is to hold her accountable, and she holds her people accountable, and they report back on a scheduled basis to share those stats with the chain of command. Intelligence-led policing. This is where you have intelligence-led collaborative law enforcement approach and problem solving, information sharing, police accountability, and enhanced intelligence operations. So you see tactical intelligence info that is analyzed and contribute directly to a specific incident. Strategic intelligence, analyze info that involves and develops over time. So this is where a lot of times you will find now, and particularly in large metropolitan areas where you have federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies working together and sharing information. And I'll give you an example of why that could be important. What if you had a situation where you had some people coming from another country? Let's say that they were smuggling guns out of the U.S. into another country. Well, so that's your international, that's your federal. Now, when they come into a state to buy those guns, now you violate state law. When you go into a specific city to pick them up, so it's affecting federal, state, and local. So this is where they would work together on the tactical and strategic intelligence. Predictive policing. Data collection, data analysis, police intervention, target response. So the data collection is constant. There's no such thing as having too much data. When the data comes in, it's going to a place, and you have a whole group of people, whole units designed to deal with, usually referred to as intelligence units, where their data collection goes. Now that data, once it's in there, a lot of times those same units will do the data analysis. And a lot of times this can be at the request of an investigator saying, hey, I got this information, I'm gonna give it to you, you tell me what. Or it could be coming from other sources, and then they get it, and then they provide it to a detective and say, hey, here's something you need to look at. Once they do that, they present it to the investigators. Now you got police intervention. It's how do you go out here and basically intervention is if you know that there's a group of people and you get them identified who are actually doing robberies and stuff, well, your goal is now is to apprehend them, to intervene before they do others. Target response. How quickly are you doing this? Target response. How quickly are you doing it? And are you targeting the right people? The target response is something where you don't have wasted motion. You know who the target or the targets are. So then you go after them. As soon as you built the case, something that will actually satisfy the prosecutor, management and the prosecutor, then you go after them. The Safe City Program. So the Safe City Program launched by Target in 2004 in Minnesota, combining of traditional policing, community policing, and data-driven policing. This was something where you had a vice president in Target who used to be in law enforcement 30 years ago. And prior to that, so then he got into corporate America and rose up to vice president. Well, then, and right around that time, this vice president at Target had a son to go into law enforcement. He and his son got to talking and realized that the law enforcement techniques and what law enforcement did hadn't changed in over 30 years. The son was doing the same thing his father was doing 30 years earlier. And that's when he said, you know what? This is not a smart way to do business for law enforcement. One of the things they did, they came up with the Safe City program where they combined traditional policing, working with the community, policing, law enforcement, the community, and utilizing data-driven information to drive policing efforts. Working together. You look at it, and this is where you start seeing some of the first signs of intelligence-led policing. But also understanding, Target understood that, in our community, Target philosophy for this vice president was this: we don't want Target to be in the community. We want Target to be part of the community. In order to be part of the community, we got to do things. We got to help bring down violent crime and quality of living for people in the community. And this was a very successful program. And now I think it's in probably about 20 or 25 different states. So that concludes chapter 5.